My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jummah Mubarak to all of you. Inshallah, we continue our halaqah, our discussion on the glorious names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty. And today's name, inshallah, is going to be Al-Quddus. Al-Quddus, inshallah. And which could be translated as the pure. The name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pure. Par excellence with without any imperfections. And as always, just to remind everyone, we are reading from the book, which is called Mawsu'at Asma Allah al-Husna by Sheikh Nabulsi, Muhammad Ratib Nabulsi, and which could be translated as the encyclopedia of the glorious names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we start the halaqah by, reminding ourselves of the purpose. Why are we, what is our niyyah and what is our intention behind studying the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We start by the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, Inna lillahi ta'ala tis'atan wa tis'ina isman mi'atan illa wahida man ahsaha dakhal al-jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are 99 names, 100 minus 1. Whoever enumerates them shall be among the people of Jannah. So our intention, inshallah, is to be among those who enumerate the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that they are among the people of Jannah. And we talked about what it means to enumerate. Man ahsaha is not just counting them or just enumerating them. There's a lot more meaning to it. We discussed that we understand what it means with the purpose of the more we know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we love Him, and the more we love Him, the closer we are to Him, and the easier it is for us to be believers, and all the obligations that we are required to perform as Muslims become very easy. Because when you are in love with the being that orders you to do something, all these commandments will be very easy to do. We also talked about enumerating these names, meaning that we understand the names in their entirety. We don't take one name without missing another. For example, when we were talking about Al-Malik last time, Al-Malik always comes with Al-Quddus, and we will talk about Al-Quddus today. So as we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and keep His names and attributes in our minds and our hearts, we keep all of these names and attributes in our minds and our hearts as we approach Him. Among enumerating these names as well is to call upon Him with the appropriate name, depending on the prayer that we're asking. Is that when I am asking for rizq, for sustenance, I should be asking Razzaq. When I'm asking for cure from an illness, I should be asking by the name of Allah Ash-Shafi. And I'm asking for forgiveness, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Ghafoor. And so this is one of the other niyat and purposes. Also, we discussed among the meaning of enumerating names is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about His names and attributes in the Quran. And almost every meaning or idea that is being conveyed in the Quran, there's always like a summary statement in the end, a summary ayah at the end, in which you see the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifest. And so our niyyah, when we enumerate the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is for us to better understand the Quran and to better understand His book subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with that introduction, inshallah, we start the name of Al-Quddus. The name of Al-Quddus occurred in the Quran twice. We also spoke about, we derive the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only from the Quran or the Sunnah. So if it is explicitly mentioned in the Quran or it is explicitly mentioned in the Sunnah, this is how we derive that this is a name from the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Hashr, which has, the last three verses of this surah has a lot of these names. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك, which we discussed last time, Al-Quddus. So this is the first time that Al-Quddus is mentioned. الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. The second instance where Al-Quddus is mentioned, it's only mentioned twice in the Quran, in Surah Al-Jum'ah. Surah Al-Jum'ah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. So you see here that in both instances it comes right after Al-Malik. And we discussed the name of Al-Malik last time, which means the sovereign. And so the author, Sheikh Nabulsi, before he goes into the meaning of Al-Quddus, he, again, emphasizes how noble this science is of studying the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he starts by, asking the question, what distinguishes us humans from other creatures and other beings? It is the intellect. Where would you want to use that intellect? How do you want to use that intellect? He argues and he asks. There's so much information, there's so much knowledge, there's so much out there. How do you select, how do you spend your time using this intellect? And he gives the example of, being in a library, for example, trying to prepare yourself for a test. Are you going to read everything in that library? Or are you going to pick only the relevant topics that are going to make you succeed in the test? And then he argues and says, what else is better, a better way to use your intellect than to study Allah, to study the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand their meaning, so that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more, your worship to Him becomes even more and more enjoyable. He loves you back and makes the ibadah even easier and easier for you and gets you closer to Him even more and more. So that you achieve this description that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes of وَمَنْ يَرْتَدِّ مِنْكُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِ فَسَوْفَ يَأْتِي اللَّهُ بِقَوْمٍ يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَ. We want to be among those people whom Allah loves and they love back. When everyone else is averting religion, staying away from religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace these people with those who love Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He loves them. يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions His love first. And so I end this introduction, or the author here ends this introduction by what I thought was a really beautiful definition of ibadah, worship. I'll read it in Arabic first and then try to translate it, inshallah. Al-ibadah طاعة طوعية ممزوجة بمحبة قلبية أساسها معرفة يقينية تفضي إلى سعادة أبدية. What does that mean? طاعة طوعية, obedience, that is, you're doing it out of self-motivation. You're doing it willingly. You're being obedient because you want to. ممزوجة بمحبة قلبية, mixed with immense love emanating from the bottom of your heart to your Creator. أساسها معرفة يقينية. The foundation of this love and this willing to be obedient is grounded in solid facts, evidence-based facts. There's this brother, his name is Hamza Karamali, I think. May Allah reward him. He has this series called Why Islam is True. It is a beautiful series, and he argues Islam is the truth. And we all know that, but we don't know how to articulate that when we talk to others. And so he has this entire series that really goes into all of these points, how you talk to others and how you convince others that our faith, people usually associate faith with, you can't provide evidence. And that's incorrect. In Islam, La ilaha illallah, which is the foundation of our deen, is based on evidence. That is clear cut. And so that's the foundation of this obedience that is mixed with love. تفضي إلى سعادة أبدية. The end result, the inevitable end result of this obedience is eternal happiness in this life and where it matters in the afterlife. So this was the introduction to Al-Quddus that the author here, Imam Al-Nabulsi, started with. And now he goes into what Al-Quddus means. Al-Quddus على وزن فعول وهو من القدس أو القدس الطهارة وهي الطهارة. And again, as the title of today's halaqah is, Al-Quddus is the pure, in the most perfect manner, par excellence, without any defects, as we learned from our brother Uqba. So the pure, Al-Quds is purity. Al-Quddus is the pure in the most ultimate description. That's why when we say Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa, we mean the purified land. And one of the earliest references to what Quddus means, or Taqdees means, comes in Surah Al-Baqarah, like in page 3 or so in Surah Al-Baqarah. And I've read this verse like 100 times and I never really understood it until I read this chapter from the Imam here. Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 30, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. This could be translated as, tell them, O Muhammad, when your Lord has spoken to the Malaika and told them that he will create a successive authority or vicegerent in this land, they responded and said, are you going to create a being that is going to wreak havoc and destroy things and spill blood? And we are here glorifying you, sanctifying you. Allah responds and says, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. So what does it mean? Nuqaddisu lak. When the malaika are saying nuqaddisu lak, my initial thinking when I read this verse, and I've read it many times, was that they make tasbih, pure, tanzih, making subhanallah, saying subhanallah. That was my initial understanding, which is also true. But the way the Imam here explained the taqdees, nuqaddisu lak, meaning that we are purifying ourselves such that we are worthy to say subhanallah, to call upon you and glorify you and sanctify you. Which is really an interesting meaning that I did not appreciate before. And we will come to that meaning later. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. And therefore, one of our tasks and one of our mandates as Muslims who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we do taqdees to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نُقَدِّسُ لَكَ as well. And that starts by purifying ourselves such that we are worthy to further do taqdees to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do tasbih to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do dhikr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Listen to this hadith Qudsi. Abdi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hadith Qudsi is a hadith narrated by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it is, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is not used as Quran. Abdi, طهرت منظر الخلق سنين أفلا طهرت منظري ساعة. O my slave, you have perfected your look and try to appear in the best state in front of my creations. Sinin, for years, should you not purify yourself? When for 1 hour, when you are meeting with me? We do our best to appear in our best, status. We try to wear our best clothes, our cleanest clothes. When we have visitors come home, we try to clean our homes, everything looking tidy. Our cars, our entire life, we try to tidy ourselves up because we're meeting other people, we're seeing other people. Yet, do we do the same thing when we are meeting with our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do we do taqdees to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? أَفَلَا طَهَّرْتَ مَنْظَرِ سَاعَةً. Manzar is what people see. Manzar is what is seen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He looks at each one of us, where would He look? He would look at your hearts. This is what matters, right? إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. On the day of judgment, no money or no progeny or children are going to matter. They're not going to they're not going to get you out of hellfire to Jannah. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Only those with a true, pure, sincere heart. This is the only thing that's going to matter for you on the day of judgment. And so when you do taqdees, you are purifying your heart from the ailments of the heart, from the maladies of the heart, purifying your heart from insincerity, from hypocrisy, from hatred, from jealousy, from arrogance. The diseases of the heart are plenty. And the most significant of them is the arrogance, because it leads to everything else, and is the sin of shaitan that kicked him out of Jannah. The Shaykh then returns to Al-Quddus, speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we think of the translation of Al-Quddus as the pure, yes, please, go ahead. Oh yeah, please do, yeah.
So the word is in Taqdees. This means to purify.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so nuqaddisu, yeah, so they are purifying themselves so that they are worthy to meet their Lord. Yeah, yeah. Please, if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt. Yeah, by all means. I think Jazakallah khair, brother. If there are any questions, I think it's always better to ask on the spot, because by the end of the class, you'll forget the question.
So Quddus and Quds, Taqdees.
The same root word. Yeah, the same Qudus, the same root word, which is comes from purity. Yeah. So when we think about pure, that which is, not unclean, right? We think of, something unclean, that's the opposite of that. That would be the pure. But actually, or at least that's how I thought about it. But actually, when, if you think about it for a second, and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest example. If you are meeting someone you really love and respect, and you want to give them words of praise, are you going to tell them or say, brother, or sister, you're not a bad person, right? That already has a negative connotation, right? You're not saying anything positive. You're saying the opposite of the negative, right? It's not the same. It's not the same. And so the Shaykh here is saying, how could you, when you think of Al-Quddus, only negating the negative or imperfect aspects? No, no, no. That's the second definition. The first and foremost definition, as he says here, Al-Munazzahu an kulli wasf. He is Quddus, purified from any description that you can think of. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. No being is like him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us or gave us some qualities that He also, subhanahu wa ta'ala, possesses in excellence, that doesn't mean that there's any comparison by any means. So when we say Allah Al-Kareem, it's just a whole different level than when we say someone is Kareem. So any description that we describe of beings, of human beings, but then we also describe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by saying and understanding the meaning of Al-Quddus, you mean another level of that description, something that is ultimate and excellent. Something that is ultimate and excellent. And there's no comparison whatsoever. And that is the meaning of Al-Quddus, that you purify Him from any of these descriptions that you give to normal mortals or to normal beings. Which is really an eye-opening description of Al-Quddus. And he again recites the surah, the ayah in Surah Al-Shura, فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. No being is like him in any way, shape, or form. ليس كمثله شيء. And that's why we come back to what we said about understanding and enumerating the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to understand them in their entirety. When you read and understand every name, you try your best, to enumerate and think of all the other names as well to get the complete picture. And then the other definition is the obvious one that initially came to my mind, at least, is that He is, perfect in every sense of the word, and with no imperfections whatsoever. Another definition for Al-Quddus, أن القدوس من تقدست عن الحاجات ذاته. He is pure in the sense that He does not need anything from any being, and does not need anything to be sustained. Does not need anything to be sustained. Another meaning of also Al-Quddus, and the Shaykh here gives an example where, to kind of emphasize the point, is that you could be the richest man alive and be in the desert and have pots of gold, yet you're still, if you're out of food and water, these pots of gold are not going to help you in any way, shape, or form, right? So you think by having so much money or having so much power or having any blessing that, you could be invincible, that you're self-sustained. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the smallest test and you realize that everything that you have is really not worth anything. Again, the meaning is in Surah Fatir as well. Ya ayyuha an-nasu antum al-fuqara'u ila Allah. You are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are in poverty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu huwa al-ghaniyyul hamid. Among the meanings of Al-Quddus as well is من تقدس عن مكان يحويه ولا يحويه مكان وعن زمان يبليه. So you purify him, and he is the ultimate pure being in the sense that no space can contain him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no time can wear him out or wear him down. Out of the constraints of space and time. These are things for us mortals. So he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, taqaddas, is purified. You should not even be thinking about how or what could contain Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that would negate his, uluhiyyah. Among the meanings of Quddus as well is that يقدس عباده الطائعين. So he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, does taqdees to you and I by purifying you. He sees that you are on his path, that you are trying with sincerity to be a better Muslim, and trying with sincerity to help others become better Muslims. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this path easier and easier for you. He puts you on this path where what you thought was not imaginable in terms of doing worship now becomes easy. He then makes all the bad sins and all the things that used to be attractive for you to do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instills instead a feeling of aversion. You don't want to be there. You look at something or you see something or you hear something that is repulsive. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be something of interest. Maybe when you were younger, you used to hide from your parents and watch it or see it or talk to your friends in secret about it. But when you turn to him in sincerity and do taqdees to yourself by purifying yourself and struggling and striving, the jihad al-akbar, striving against yourself to become a better Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sanctifies you more, does taqdees to you more, and makes it easier and easier for you to become among the people of worship. And so Al-Quddus من قدس نفوس الأبرار عن المعاصي وأخذ الأشرار بالنواصي. And so the Quddus, as he does taqdees to your hearts and taqdees to your faculties from doing sins, He also takes those the evil with punishment. And again, I return back to this ayah, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. My dear brothers and sisters, that's all we ask for, is that qalb salim, that pure, sound heart. This is our way to save ourselves from the hellfire, is to be among those who have the sound heart, this clean heart. And that will not happen except from Al-Quddus, who will do taqdees to your heart, will do taqdees to your faculties, to your appendages. Among the meaning of Quddus as well, and among the ways by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does taqdees to your heart, is to dissociate your attachment to the worldly matters. You do everything that you need, you work, you take care of your kids, you're a good business person, you do everything in your power, to be a successful individual in your life. You do that, but it doesn't overtake your heart. You are not a slave of the system. You are not a slave of the dollar. You are not a slave of your kids. You are not a slave of your interests, even if they're harmless. So the dunya, you live the dunya, right? وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. You live and enjoy your life and do everything you can to be successful, but you never let a dunya overtake your heart and overtake your being, and you become a slave to anything in this dunya. And that comes from Al-Quddus. That is one way by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifies your heart and mind. And that's why, you hear these stories, which I still amaze me, that, Imam al-Shafi'i, for example, would, recite the Quran, the entire Quran in one day, or sometimes twice a day, in addition to his regular, work and scholarship and studying and teaching. And you wonder, how is that even possible? Even if he has the time, how does he have the energy to do all of this? You hear these incredible stories, but now as we read and understand, when you have Allah's power, when you have Allah's taqdees to you, these things become like a walk in the park. They become easy things for you to do. That's why no matter how hard, no matter the hardship you're going through, no matter how tough things go, those who attach themselves to Al-Quddus never get, overwhelmed with sadness, never get overwhelmed with depression, because they understand the meaning of Al-Quddus, and because they have asked and did taqdees to themselves, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased them in their purity. And therefore, these incredible abilities and incredible deeds of worship that we hear from the scholars and those who are, pious individuals, these are from the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you and I can be among these people. We just have to work for it, like these individuals did. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. And among the believers, are individuals who were truthful to what they promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The covenant they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were truthful in that covenant. Some of them have passed, and some of them are waiting. And وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And they will not trade this status of sincerity and being truthful to their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way, shape, or form. They will never substitute that status for anything in the world. And the reason why again, the reason why these individuals do these great things worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that they actually tasted what it means to be between the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His worship. They tasted that enjoyment. So they say, "Man dhaqa araf." Because you tasted the sweetness of Iman, you will never let go. And this is among the fruits of the taqdees that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does to His servants. So how do we, now that we know what Quddus means? Quddus, we said, munazzahun an kulli wasf. Any description we make of any being, He subhanahu wa ta'ala is, laysa kamithlihi shay. Nothing is like Him subhanahu wa ta'ala in any of these descriptions. We purify Him from any imperfections. We purify ourselves so that we are worthy of doing tasbih and purifying Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-Quddus will purify our hearts further and further, such that we are among those who come on the Day of Judgment with the sound, faithful, sincere heart. So knowing what we know about al-Quddus, our job and our mandate is to purify our hearts. And it's not an easy task. It is not an easy task. It requires jihad. It requires strive. That is the jihad al-kabir, right? To struggle against oneself and against one's desires. You purify your income. You purify your behavior, your tongue. You purify your eyes that they don't fall on anything that is haram. You don't walk, you don't use your legs to go to places that are haram. You don't use your hands to do anything that is haram. And so the key message that the Shaykh is saying here, احرص على أن يراك حيث أمرك وأن يفقدك حيث نهاك. Do everything in your power so that He sees you where He commanded you to be, in the masajid, praying at night, in your homes, seeing you helping others in the community. وَأَنْ يَفْقِدَكَ حَيْثُ نَهَاكَ. And that He does not see you in these places where He told you not to be. You purify your time from doing anything that is of disobedience. You purify your heart from anything that would keep your heart busy, even if it's innocuous, even if it's not something haram. Too much, if something occupies your heart, even if it's not haram too much, then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do taqdees. You ask al-Quddus to purify your heart further from clinging to anything that is dunya related. And to also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and work as well to purify your inner, your inner self. One of the toughest things to struggle with is, which are among the issues of the heart, is the the sincerity, the issues of sincerity. People are watching me, and how does that affect what I do? And it's a constant struggle. You do your best to get to the point where it doesn't matter who's around. It doesn't matter, what I do is only between me and my Lord, and I don't care who's around. But, it comes and goes, where you feel that some of your actions are affected by whoever's around you. But our goal is that to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to sanctify us and do taqdees to us, such that that does not matter anymore. And among the understanding of Al-Quddus is that you never make yourself do anything humiliating to achieve anything. Because you don't want being in that position where you are associating yourself, or you're making yourself do something that makes you puts you in a compromised situation. That is embarrassing, or that is degrading, just to achieve something from this dunya. How do you meet your Quddus? How do you meet Al-Quddus when you have done something like this? And to always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to never ask anyone else. And he cites the example of Sayyidina Ibrahim when he was thrown in the hellfire. And then Sayyidina Jibreel came to him and said, do you need something? And then Ibrahim alayhi salam said, you, I don't. From my Lord, I do. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. And so, with understanding that name of Al-Quddus and living by the name of Al-Quddus, purifying your inside, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love purifies you even further, and eventually get to realize the meaning of ibadah that we started this halaqah with, which is ibadatun taw'iyya, obedience with full willingness, mamzujatun bimahabbatin qalbiyya, mixed with immense love, asasuha ma'rifa yaqiniyya, built the foundation of that obedience and that love is solid facts, tufdi ila sa'adatin abadiyya, that leads to eternal happiness. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ask Al-Quddus that we do taqdees to ourselves such that we are worthy of worshiping Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that He encompasses us with His taqdees such that our hearts and our faculties are stay away from that which is haram, or that which is that consumes us, such that we lose our target and our goal of being عباده المؤمنين. آمين يا رب العالمين. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك ربي وأتوب إليك. Our next class, inshallah, is going to be the name of Allah, As-Salam. The name of Allah, As-Salam. Al-Malik al-Quddus As-Salam. In case you want to prepare or have some readings or come with some questions, Jazakumullah khairan, and I'll open it up for Q&A or comments or maybe instances or situations when you have really felt the name of Al-Quddus and you'd like to share with us. I'm happy to hear from the brothers or the sisters. Jazakumullah khairan. Any, yes? Mhm.